Brachos, Daf Brachos through Nun Hey. The Gemara discusses the text of the third bracha, Birchas Hamazon. Rav Nachman says, even if you start Rachem al Yisrael, even if you start as we do, al Yisrael Amecha, still you end with Bnei Yerushalayim. You don't have to say anything about saving Yisrael. You just finish with Bnei Yerushalayim. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that we begin either with Rachem or with Nachemenu, but we do say Yisrael. We end the bracha with Bnei Yerushalayim or with Menachem Tfilim B'Vinyan Yerushalayim, but we don't say anything about Yisrael. Shulchan Aruch says we don't say anything different on Shabbos than we do during the week. This is a machlokes rishonim. Mishnah Berurah brings that the Gaon said the Ikar is like the Rif, that during the week you say Rachem, and on Shabbos you say Nachemenu, and you end also with Menachem, not with Bnei Yerushalayim. Other rishonim hold like that. The minhag certainly generally is that we say Rachem both on Shabbos and during the week. Another machlokas between the Gaon and other poskim. The Ramah says that we say Bonei Barachma of Yerushalayim v'chein nagim. Even though the pasuk the Gemara brought is Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem, we say the Mordechai, the Ramah says you say Bonei Barachma. Why? Because it says the pasuk also says Shavti Yerushalayim Barachamim. So you say Barachamim. The Gaon disagrees, and Maser Rav, the Gaon says that he would simply say Bonei Yerushalayim, and he would not say Bonei Barachma. The Gemara discusses what happens if a person forgot to mention Shabbos or Yom Tov or Rosh Chodesh on the respective days. So if a person forgot, if he remembers before he begins the fourth bracha, if it's a special bracha you can say for Shabbos, for Yom Tov, for Rosh Chodesh, the Gemara gives the text of the various brachos that you say on all those respective occasions. You can only say those brachos before you've begun Hatov HaMeitiv. Once a person, you say it with Shem Malchus, the beginning at least, you can only say it until you get to Hatov HaMeitiv. Once you've begun Hatov HaMeitiv, then on Shabbos and Yom Tov, where mentioning the Ma'orah, mentioning Shabbos and Yom Tov is Likuva. If you don't say it, you're not Yotzei even B'diavad, you have to bench again. Rosh Chodesh, you don't bench again because you don't have to eat bread on Rosh Chodesh. If you don't know that bracha, then on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're not Yotzei, you're going to have to go bench again. If you know the general idea of the bracha the Mishnah Berurah brings, you know the beginning, the end, even if you don't know the exact text in the middle, then you can still say the Mishnah Berurah brings, B'Shem the Taz and other Achronim, at least, that you can still say the bracha, what you remember, even if you don't know the exact text. The Chayadim explains, Mishnah Berurah brings, the Chayadim explains that what does it mean that you've begun Hatov HaMeitiv? It's only when you've said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Hakel. Once you said the word Hakel, that's clearly Hatov HaMeitiv. But if you've just said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, that could be the bracha that you say for Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh. The bracha is Shenasan Shabbasan L'Menucha or Asher Nasan Yom Tovim L'Amo Yisrael. So as long as you haven't said the word Hakel, you can still go back and say those brachas. You don't have to bench again. However, the Mishnah Berurah himself says that other Achronim are mashma that once you've said Baruch Atah Hashem, the beginning of Hatov HaMeitiv, and you intended it to be for Hatov HaMeitiv, even though the words will still fit the new bracha, it's too late already. And you have to go back on Shabbos and Yom Tov, not like the Chayadim. Tzarech Yin Gadol, he says what to do in such a case. For Rosh Chodesh, there's also a bracha you say, similar to Shabbos and Yom Tov, if you haven't started Hatov HaMeitiv, but it has no chasima. You just say, Shenasan Rosh Chodashim L'Amo Yisrael is Ikarn. You say Hashem's Shem Malchus in the beginning, but not in the chasima. However, once you hit Hatov HaMeitiv, you don't have to go back. As we said, because on Rosh Chodesh, not saying Yalav Yavo is not Ma'akev B'diavad. Chol HaMoed also is like Rosh Chodesh. The Shulchan Aruch brings that Suda Shlishis on Shabbos, if you forgot to say Ritzei and Suda Shlishis, it's also like Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to go back. Mishnah Berurah explains, even though most poskim say you do have to wash until Yadayim and eat bread for Suda Shlishis, so it should be like Shabbos and not like Rosh Chodesh, but nevertheless, since there is an opinion that says you don't have to have bread, even though it's not the Ikar L'Halacha, a person should be machmer. The Ikar L'Halacha, you should be machmer to eat bread, but b'di'evan, when it's a question of Safik Brach L'Vatala, you don't have to go back if you forgot Yalav Yava. On Daf Nun, the Gemara brings a story. Rava says that when they used to eat at the home of the Reish Galusa, they would, even though they had a zimun of 10, they would split up, and they would split up into smaller groups of 3. Why? Because they couldn't hear him, so they couldn't hear, it was too crowded, too noisy, they couldn't hear the Reish Galusa zimun, and they wouldn't have had zimun at all, so the best they could do is to break up into groups of 3. Why couldn't they make their own small zimun of 10? The Reish Galusa would have been makbid, he would have gotten upset at them. Mishnah Berurah brings a discussion in the Achronim, if there's another reason why they have to go early. It's a Dvar Mitzvah, there's a mitzvah they have to do. Is that a good enough reason, like not getting the Reish Galusa angry, to skip the zimun of 10? So he says, and Magen Avram says that's a good reason. You can break up into groups of 3 to do a mitzvah. Chayadim says no, that certainly if there's not going to be 10 left, you certainly can't be mevatel zimun for your mitzvah. And if it's mitzvah daraisa, maybe you could. So the Acharonim debate whether needing to do a mitzvah is a good enough reason to give up the zimun of 10, even if you're going to have the zimun of 3. Mishnah Berurah brings that the problem in the case of the Gemara, some Acharonim learn, the problem in the case of the Gemara is that they couldn't have heard the bracha of the zimun at all. They couldn't have heard Rabbasayin Nevareh. However, if they could hear the bracha of the zimun itself, even if they couldn't hear the rest of benching, the rest of Berachas Hamazon, then they would have stayed. Then they were not allowed to give up the zimun of Yud of 10. They would have had to stay and join the zimun because it's good enough if they can hear the bracha of the zimun itself from the Mavarach. Mishnah Berurah says many Acharonim disagree. They say that the Ikar Adin is you really have to hear the entire benching, or at least the entire first bracha until Hazanas Hakol. You really have to bench quietly and listen to the Mizamein and say along with him. And if you don't do that, if you don't even hear the first bracha, you're not really Yotzi Zimun at all. So even if they could have heard the Zimun itself, if they couldn't have heard the entire benching, or at least the entire first bracha, at least until Hazanas Hakol, then anyway they should have broken the Zimun and made their own Zimun of 3 because you're really not Yotzi Zimun. This is a big problem. Many places where you have Zimun today, people are not meticulous that the Mizamein should bench out loud and that everyone should bench quietly and listen word for word to the first bracha. Mishnah Berurah in many places, as I recall, talks about how this is essential to Zimun. People are not so strict about it today. Mishnah Berurah goes so far as to say, the Achronim say, that if there is a large party, you should give the bracha of Zimun to someone who has a loud voice. Everyone should hear them. Everyone should hear, again, at least the bracha of Zimun, and according to Mishnah Berurah, preferably the whole benching, or at least the first bracha of Hazanas Hakol. So practically you should give it to someone who has a loud voice. The Gemara goes on, the Mishnah says that if you have 3 people together, they're the Chi of Zimun, they can't separate and say Berachas Hamazon by themselves. Neither can 4 or 5, because there'll be at least one group that won't have 3. If they're 6, they could be Cholik until you hit 10. At 10, they can't divide, because again, if they break up, they won't be 10. Until you hit 20, then they can break into 2 groups of 10. That's how we paskin. Mishnah Berurah brings Machlokes, though, whether if you have 6, you're allowed to be Cholik. Is it better to, or is it better not to? So there is a svara to say mitzvah min hamuvchar not to be cholik, to do the largest zimun you can, even though it's the same zimun, you're going to have the same 3, the same category of 3 or 10. Nevertheless, it's a mitzvah to have the larger group, not to have 2 small groups, because of Baravam Hadras Melech, the general principle that doing mitzvahs with a large group is better. On the other hand, the Mishnah Berurah says there is a svara that it's better to have marba brachas, to make more brachas, more zimuns. So the Ramah says you're not mechuyev to be cholik, but you're allowed to. Darkei Moshe says it's better to not to be cholik. Other Acharonim say they're both good. Both ways are good. It's good to have rovam. It's also good apparently to have riboy brachos. So they're shkulim. They're equal. Person can do whatever he wants. There's no moral valence to doing one way more than the other. The Gemara on Nun Amud Beis talks about washing washing the Tilas Yadayim with wine, different types of wine that is. It talks about wine that is wine that's still considered wine that's considered water already. The Gemara talks about the wine that is nasan l'toch hamayim, lo nasan l'toch hamayim, whether it's considered wine or water, whether you can wash Tilas Yadayim with it. We paskin, there are several shittas in the Shulchan Aruch that some say any liquid, including wine, is kosher mikra din for Tilas Yadayim, and Shulchan Aruch explains we don't worry about ibur ochlim, about baltashkes or bizi ochlim, because it's a genuine need. You need to wash Tilas Yadayim, so you're using the juice or the wine for something productive, for a mitzvah even. So some say you can do it. Just that wine you shouldn't do l'chatchila, because wine is a special halacha. It's even more than the regular halacha bizi ochlim, since wine is so chashuv, it's so important to get its own bracha. You should treat wine with a special care. But really, in the Ikra Din, you can use anything from Tilas Yadayim, both in terms of the rules of Tilas Yadayim as well as the rules of Bizei Ochlim. It's really okay. Ramah brings an opinion that distinguishes between white wine and red wine. Red wine is a different color than water, so it's worse. Another sheet in the Shulchan Aruch is that you can really use meiperos, you can use other types of fruit juices, b'shas chak at least, you could use from the Tilas Yadayim if it's a difficult situation. However, but not wine, because wine is a real drink. Wine is not water. Wine is something different from water with sugar in it. Wine is something new. And the first sheet in the Shulchan Aruch is an earlier sheet that says, no, you can't use anything from the Tilas Yadayim except for water. So again, one sheet that says you can't use anything except water, Mikra Din, in terms of the laws in the Tilas Yadayim. One sheet that says you can use anything, although except for wine, l'chatchila not, because of the chashivas of wine. Third shita says other drinks, yes, because they're really just water. Wine is considered different. Mishnah Berurah says that the ikra din is lahachmer b'yayin. You should not do until you're with wine. The ikra din, even b'shas v'tzchak, but to be lenient about meiperos, about other drinks which are basically water, flavored water. Again, b'shas v'tzchak. L'chatchila you shouldn't do it. It's better not to do something with ochlin like that if you don't need to. But b'shas v'tzchak, at least you can use other drinks, non-wine, for netilas yadayim. The Gemara also talks about, he says you can do various things with bread. Also, you can do whatever you need to with bread. But you shouldn't do things that will ruin the bread, that will make the bread unappealing and you won't be able to eat it. Again, that's a form of bizei ochlim. You should not do that. Only things that are most, though, but other types of fruits or nuts or pomegranates, which if you do those things, they won't become most and they won't be revolting, then that's fine. Mishnah Berurah says you do things for refuah, they have a therapeutic value, even if they're most, that's a legitimate use of food. Or anything else Mishnah Berurah says, something which is normal and derech ha'olam, it's a common practice to do that with food. It's not bizei ochlim if that's normal. He says in the time of Chazal, they used to pour wine, spray wine on the ground to freshen up the ground or something like that, and they used to put wine and oil on their skins. Even though you're not eating it, that's not bizei ochlim. That's a normal, legitimate use of the food, and that's okay. The Gemara also says you don't throw bread, and the post can bring that this goes beyond the concern of the Gemara about mius, about ruining the bread. This is even in a case where it won't become mos. It's just not respectful to bread. All other food you can throw if it won't become ruined. Hard fruit, nuts, and so on, you can throw if they won't be ruined. Bread you cannot throw even if it will not be ruined. Mishnah Berurah brings in a couple of places that when you give out the bread for hamotzi, you shouldn't throw it. Even if it won't get ruined, you shouldn't toss it down to other people because it's disrespectful for bread. There is, however, a minhag, the Hisaris Tshuva brings from his father, the Ksav Sofer. He did used to throw the bread when he made a motzi. He used to toss the bread to other people at the table. When I first saw a friend of mine throwing his bread, I thought he was just being flippant and maybe ignorant of the halacha. He told me, no, it's a minhag. Hungarians, we have this minhag. We throw the bread. The Hisaris Tshuva suggests it has to do with the mizbeach. They used to throw stuff onto the mizbeach. So they try to justify why it's not busy bread, but there is a minhag that's practiced among some Hungarians, perhaps some Hasidim, that they throw the bread, even though it seems to be in defiance of this din that we don't throw bread. The Gemara discusses what you do if you have begun to eat, you have food in your mouth or drink, and you realize you haven't made a bracha, you forgot to make a bracha. The Gemara says 3 brises. One says you swallow it, one says you spit it out, one says you move it to the side of your mouth. The Gemara explains if it's liquid and if you spit it out it'll be ruined and you can't get it to the side of your mouth, it just flows all over and spitting it out will ruin it, then you just swallow it. If it's something that you can spit out, then it'll be okay. A piece of an apple, you spit it out, just put it back in afterwards, and that's fine. If it's something that's ideal, because you shouldn't make a bracha with food in your mouth. The Gemara says it's not the right way to make a bracha. If it's something that will be most if you spit it out, but it's not liquid, you could just move it to the side of your mouth, and it's not the best way to make a bracha, but it's better than spitting it out and ruining it, and so on. What happens in the case of liquid? Let's say where you have no choice, so you swallow it. So what happens after you swallow it? Can you still make the bracha after the eating it or not? Normally we make a bracha before we eat, obviously. What happens if you have to swallow it for this reason? Do you still make the bracha? Shulchan Aruch says you don't make a bracha. Yesh Omrim, some say you do make a bracha. And Shulchan Aruch says v'chein nirei ikr, that the ikr is that you do. However, the Mishnah Berurah says most poskim say you do not make a bracha. You do not make a bracha rishona. You still make a bracha achrona if you drank enough, but you don't make a bracha rishona unless you're eating more or drinking more. You don't make a bracha achrona after you swallow the food. Mishnah Berurah also brings from the Levushay Srad that if you only have a little bit in your mouth, even liquid, you can still make the bracha. It's possible, so then it's better to make the bracha than to eat it than to swallow it without the bracha. Also, the Mishnah Berurah brings some Achronim say, the Magen Avraham, the El Yerabba, that this thing about swallowing the liquid is only if you need the liquid. You're thirsty, you have to drink something, you don't have any more to drink, and if you spit it out, you simply will go thirsty. Then we say, b'diavad, you put it in your mouth, you can swallow it because there's no other good choice. But if you have other drinks, and then it's better to spit it out. So it'll be ruined, so spit it out, it'll spit it into the sink, and then drink something else. It's better to do that than to rely on this thing of swallowing the drink without a bracha. The Gemara in Aleph talks about different things that should be done to a kosher bracha. The Gemara first brings, there are 10 things that the Chacham said about kosher bracha. Then Rabbi Yochanan said, we only practice 4 of them. The 4 that he says are hadacha, shtifa, chai, and malei, rinsing out the kos in various ways, and the wine should be chai, different shatim, should be undiluted, at least in the beginning, should be full. Hadachim b'bifnim, the Gemara says, rinsing it on the inside of the kos, shtifim b'chutz, on the outside of the kos. Even though the Rabbi Yochanan says we only do 4 of these, the Rishonim bring the other Amoraim, the Gemara goes on and relates that other Amoraim did other of these things. We'll discuss some of them in a moment. So you see that they should do it. It's good to be machmer, the kosher bracha, to do at least some of the other 10 things. Shtifa v'hadacha is nikra din. Everyone agrees you have to do that. So Tosfos says shtifa v'hadacha means cleaning it out from bits of food, which are not nice, which are gross. If the wine shiurei kosos, if it has leftover dregs, and the Shabura brings, it doesn't just mean leftover bits of wine. It means wine that had bread soaked in it, so it has crumbs and soggy bread. That's gross, and you should wash out the kos from that before you eat. Before you use the kos for a kosher bracha. But if the kos is clean and not dirty, then you don't need shtifa v'hadacha. It's not exeris hakasa. You don't need shtifa v'hadacha unless the kos is actually dirty. Mishabura brings that if you wipe the kos with towels and make it clean, that's also good. Mishabura does say though that if the kos is dirty, even if it doesn't have shiurei pas, even if it doesn't, but if it's not totally clean, you should wash it unless it's naki v'tzach, unless it's shiny and gleaming. You should wash it even if it doesn't actually have bits of bread. However, contemporary poskim say, they bring from Nissen Karelitz, that once a person washes the kos, he puts it away after Shabbos or Friday night, he washes the kos and puts it away and then takes it out. Next Shabbos ready to use, you don't have to wash it again. It's clean. You wash it and it's clean. If nothing happens in the closet, so that's okay. One of the things the Gemara says about kosher bracha is that you take it in two hands and then you hold it in your right hand, unless you're a lefty. Poskim say, so why do you take it in two hands? Mishabura brings the Taz, explains to show that the mitzvah is beloved to you. You take it as something that you want. You only hold it in one hand. You hold it in two hands continuously. It looks like it's a burden. You hold it in one hand to show I'm enjoying this. It's not dragging on me. So it's better to hold it in one hand. The Gemara talks about whether you can have the other hand helping. The Gemara talks about Ma'u she'tasei eliyamin. Can the left hand help the right hand? Poskim explain that means that you put one hand on the side of the coast, and say one hand on another part of the coast. That on two different parts of the coast. That's a bayit lo of shita. The Gemara says, and the Gemara says naver l'chumra yishri machmer. However, the Ramah says that if the second hand does not touch the coast, if the second hand just supports the first hand, you put the small tachas hayamin to help you. That's okay. But the Mishabura says the Achronim say yishri machmer even on that. Chatchila yishri machmer even on that. In lo l'tzarech, not to have your left hand involved at all. One of the other things the Gemara says about kosher bracha is Ravasi parasudra al reisha. He covered his head with some kind of garment. So the poskim bring, the Bach says that a Yarei Shemayim should rely, when he benches, should not rely simply on his yarmulke, simply on a simple head covering. He should put his hat on. And some say that they would wear Beged Elyon, an outer garment, not just your shirt, what we would call a jacket perhaps. And that's what the Gemara talks about ituf. One of the 10 things the kos needs is ituf. So this thing of putting on the hat and the jacket is a form of ituf. So the Bach recommends you should do it, and he says the minhag is this way. The poskim say the minhag is this way. That when they say Brachos Hamazon, Mishabura brings from the poskim that they put their hats on, and even biyachid, even if you don't have a kos. The Gemara is talking about kosher bracha. Even if a person is being mavarech biyachid, where the minhag is typically not to have a kos. Some people don't have a kos even when they bench in groups of 3 or more. But even if you don't have a kos, still it's recommended, even though it's no longer an issue of kosher bracha, still it's recommended that you do this because it encourages your shemayim and kavana and focus on the bracha the poskim say. One of the things the Gemara says, discussing the kosher bracha, Rav Shesha says, birchas haaretz. When it comes to the second bracha, the bracha of no dilacha. Poskim explain that means that they would add water, they would start out with the wine being chai, the wine being unmazik, to show how strong and potent the wine of Eretz Yisrael is. When they got to birchas haaretz, they would put in water. Most people today don't put in water at all, not at the beginning, not in birchas haaretz. Based on the Torah says our wine is not that strong, is not that potent, does not need meziga. That's the minhag. The Ramah says in our countries we don't put water into our wine at all. However, the Beis Yosef brings that the minhag is that they do put in water at birchas haaretz, regardless of how strong the wine is. He brings different reasons. First, he brings a Rambam that some say that the wine is always better, it's always arev, more pleasant, sweeter if it has a little bit of water in. Doesn't matter how strong the wine is. Then he brings from the Zohar that there's sod, that there are mystical reasons putting water in, and indeed among the Hasidim, there are certain groups that are very particular about this, to always add even a token amount of wine, presumably because of the Kabbalistic reasons why putting in wine is a great thing to do. The Gemara says that we pick up the kos from the karka, a tefach above the ground. Kos Yeshuos Yaso v'Shem Hashem Akra. I lift up a kos of salvation, and I call out the name of Hashem, like the kos shel bracha. So the Gemara says karka, but the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah says, the poskim say that that's karka if you're sitting on the ground. If you're sitting at a table, it has to be a tefach above the table. It's not just half an inch above the table, it has to be a full tefach above the table. The reason is simply because to make the kos visible, so everyone should see it. It should be apparent and readily visible to everyone at the table. The Gemara in the end of the parak, the end on Daf Aleph and Beis, the end of Shlosha Shachlu, the 7th parak, the Gemara says, very last words, V'hilchasa b'kulu yoshev v'mavarech. The Gemara talks about different cases. A person's walking or sitting or standing. Can he make the bracha? What position can he make the bracha? And we paskin by all of them, yoshev and mavarech. A person needs to sit down for brachas hamazon. Mishnah Berurah says even bracha revius, even the 4th bracha, which is drabanan, you still should sit down. Lo zalzuli bit. We don't want people to not treat the 4th bracha seriously. So you should sit even for the 4th bracha. The implication is once you pass the 4th bracha and you get to the harachamans, perhaps a person no longer needs to sit. The Gemara in Daf Beis talks about the idea of a kos pagum, tamo pagmo. The Gemara says quite succinctly. That's the idea of a kos pagum. Once you taste it, you drink from it. The kos's pagum cannot be used for a kosher bracha. Now, not only that, but you shouldn't even pour it back into the bottle of wine like that. But the Eved, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, as long as there was more wine in the bottle than the kos, it'll be batel. But chatchila, once the wine is pagum, you shouldn't even pour it back into the. Shulchan Aruch says it's kosher if you do. The wine, the whole bottle won't become possible. But the Mishnah Berurah explains chatchila, you shouldn't really do that. Chatchila, you should not pour a kos pagum straight back into the bottle. What do you do? So the Shulchan Aruch himself brings. The poskim say, how do you correct the kos pagum? If you add a little bit more wine, or even a little bit of water, that eliminates the concern of kos pagum. So if you want to pour your kos pagum, you drank some wine for kiddush or avdallah or something else, and you want to pour it back into the bottle, what do? You first add a little bit more wine in, and then you pour the rest of it back into the bottle, and that's l'chachila, everything is fine. The Gemara brings on Daf Beis and Beis. The Gemara talks about Keichel from Tilas Yadayim Suda. That Tilas Yadayim should be immediately before the Suda. Not entirely clear that we paskin like that, but assuming that we do, nevertheless, the Shulchan Aruch brings 2 opinions how to understand the rule of Teichel from Tilas Yadayim Suda. Should be immediately before the Suda. And so the first sheet, the lenient opinion of the Shulchan Aruch says you don't really have to be so strict about waiting. When the Gemara says Teichel, it means you shouldn't get involved in something else. You shouldn't start changing your car's oil or you're riding Chidushei Torah. You shouldn't get involved in things that have nothing to do with the Suda that lead to Hesach Hadas. However, if you just sit there and wait before you start the Suda, and even if you talk a little bit, if it's not something that's distracting and leads to Hesach Hadas, that is okay. That's the first opinion. There's another opinion, V'yesh Omrim, that you shouldn't be mafsik at all, that you tarach lizar, and Mishnah Berurah says that means even b'shtika. You shouldn't even wait too long, and that's a pretty brief share. Even shiyah l'chud, you shouldn't even wait too long with before the Suda. Certainly you shouldn't talk. Even a brief amount of talking, even divrei Torah you shouldn't speak. Mishnah Berurah discusses whether you can say the tefillah the tefillah one says before he eats during that period. So the halacha is there are these 2 opinions, and the Shulchan Aruch rules that tov lizar, it's better to be meticulous and not to speak, or even to wait, according to the Mishnah Berurah, between the Tilas Yadayim and the meal. However, the Mishnah Berurah says even the stringent view says that if you're talking about the Suda, if you're talking bring the salt or something, that's okay. It's mashma even l'chatchila. People are very strict about this. People who know the halacha will be very careful to say and to make all kinds of gesticulations to indicate what they need: the salt, the knife, the honey for Rosh Hashanah. It seems that anything me'ein hasuda is mutter gomer. It doesn't depend on this machlokas. So I often do talk. Most people are strict. I'm not sure if it never hurts, I guess, to be more strict and to be more careful, because one thing can lead to another. But the ikar halacha seems to be that talking regarding the suda seems to be mutter. Talking not about the suda or undue delay is a problem, and better, again, you don't have to wash again as long as you weren't actually Mesiach Das, but l'chatchila you shouldn't wait between the Tilas Yadayim or talk between the Tilas Yadayim and the actual eating the bread. How long is considered waiting too long? The shir it takes to walk Chaf Beis Amma, not a very long time. The time it takes to walk something like 33, 44 feet, which doesn't seem a very long time. L'chatchila, that's what you should do. Gemara and Gimel talks about Havdalah, many halachas of what kind of ner you can use, what kind of besamim you should use, ner sheshavas, and different types of besamim that are ineligible. At one point, the Gemara talks about, the Gemara brings the brisa, that if a person has a panos, if a person has a lamp, a different lantern, there is a ner, but it's blocked, it's obscured, the Gemara talks about, you can't use that for Havdalah. The Shulchan Aruch says, even aspaklaria, even if the ner is inside an aspaklaria behind a glass, that's not called, you're not really seeing the ner properly, and you should not make barei merei ha'esh. Mishnah Berurah, that some Achronim say that's only if it's an iron lantern, a lattice work of iron. So even though you can see the light, it's blocked by the iron bars, by the iron part of the lantern. However, a glass lantern, that's fine. You can see the light right through the glass. You could make the bracha. Mishnah Berurah says, Biur Halacha, many poskim say, like the Shulchan Aruch, that you shouldn't use any kind of lantern, even a glass one. L'chatchila, a person should have a naked flame, not behind a glass. How close do you have to be? What do you actually have to do to make the bracha on Bar Nira Ha'esh? The Gemara brings two opinions. One shita says that you have to be a yosu mamish, you have to actually have hana from the ner. The other shita says that you simply have to be close enough. Well, the first shita is the lenient shita that says even if you're not close enough, as long as if you would be close, the ner has sufficient brightness that if you would be close enough, you could be nana from it, you could gain benefit from it. That's enough to make the bracha. Rava, the second shita, is the strict shita, yeosu mamash. You really have to be close enough to have hana. How close is that? The Gemara says to be able to tell two coins apart, between an isser and a punyon, to tell other things apart. And Rava says would make a bracha on the ner of Beiguria Bar Chama, which Rashi says it was near his house. It wasn't inside his house, but at least it was close enough. Mishnah Berurah says you see it doesn't have to be inside the same house, but it has to be close enough to have this hana. That's how we pass it in Shulchan Aruch. You need yeosu mamash. You have to be yeosu la'oro, which means you have to be close enough that you can discern the difference between the two coins, the coin from one city and the coin of another city. Some contemporary Achronim say that the language of the Shulchan Aruch implies you don't have to actually have hana. You have to just be close enough that you could have hana. So they say the nafkamina is, let's say the electric light is on. So you're not getting any hana from the candle. The light is on. So there is no hana from the candle. Doesn't matter. As long as you're close enough, various contemporary poskim say that's okay. There is, however, a minhag that we look at hands or fingernails for Havdalah. That's based on a Bryce and Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer the Rishonim bring. You look at the palms of the hands, the Gaonim, and so on. Palms of the hands, the fingernails, various reasons of Siman Bracha. That's an ancient minhag going back more than 1,000 years to look at the palms and fingernails during Havdalah. There is a machlokes, though. The Achronim debate whether you should do this before the bracha or after the bracha. Is it like Brachos Hanenin? You first make the bracha, then have the hana. Maybe it's like Brachos Shvach, that you see the lightning, as we're going to see in the next parak. You see the lightning and next daf, and then you make the bracha. Suppose you disagree. There are different minhagim. Some say the minhag is that you look at it first. Others look at it afterwards. There are both minhagim and there are shittas and achronim both ways. The Gemara says you don't have to be machazer ala ark, you darash machazer ala mitzvahs. You don't have to look for an ar. If you have it, you make the bracha. If not, you can make Havdalah without it. And Mishnah Berurah says that you'll rake the bracha on the ner later whenever you see a ner. Gemara talks about someone who ate. He really is supposed to go back to where he if he walked away, he should go back to where he ate to make the bracha. Gemara brings different opinions. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Shogeg, and Mezid. What is the halacha l'maisa? We pass in l'chatchila. You should make the bracha before you leave the place where you ate. If you left without making a bracha, if you were Mezid, if you deliberately did that, you definitely have to go back to where you ate. And even with the evidence, it's a question whether you're yotze. And if it was b'shogeg, then it's machlokes rishonim. The Rambam says b'shogeg, if you left the original place b'shogeg, you can bench wherever you are. Rabbeinu Yonah, the Rosh Shulchan Aruch say you should go back to where you ate. Mishnah Berurah says that chatchila, unless it's a shasut chak, you should go back to where you ate, even if you left b'shogeg. If a person has more bread, he can just continue eating bread wherever he is, even less than a kazayis, and then even that's mitzvah after the first eating, then he can make the berachas hamazon wherever he ate the final bread. This happens sometimes. You eat in shul, you go home, and or you go to a kiddush and someone in sukkah, and then go somewhere else. As long as you ate in the final place, you can still make the bracha in the final place that you ate. Which brachas do you have to go back for? The Gemara is talking about berachas hamazon. Some say all shevas aminim you have to go back to where you ate. Some say only chameshes minei dagan, only the 5 types of grain. Some say only bread itself. Linyan Dina, the Mishnah Berurah says halacha l'maisa. He brings the gon who says the halacha is the hey minei dagan. If you ate any of the 5 grains, you ate Cheerios, you ate pretzels or cake, you have to go back. They're like bread, and you have to go back and bench where you ate. If you ate other types of things, grapes and other fruits, then according to the gon, you don't have to go back and make the bracha. How long do you have to make a bracha once you ate? Until digestion. How much is digestion? How do you know if the food is digested? So as long as you're not hungry from eating, then we say you can still make the bracha. The digestion hasn't concluded yet. Other fruits also, as long as you don't have any more appetite for those fruits, we say they're not fully digested. Mishnah Berurah says that's fine when you ate until you were full. Then if you're not full, the digestion hasn't finished. But if you only ate a little bit to begin with, you only had a quick snack and you're still hungry, so obviously that doesn't mean it's digested. You just ate it. So then how much time do you have? So Mishnah Berurah says many Achronim say you can rely on a share of the time it takes to walk 4 mil, which is assumed to be 72 minutes. Until then, you can assume that digestion has not concluded yet. Your digestion has not occurred. Some Achronim say that no, that really you shouldn't rely on that. You should eat a little bit more. You should eat another kazayas of bread, then make berachas hamazon. Mishnah Berurah says if you don't have bread, you can rely on the first shita that until 72 minutes the digestion has not occurred. The point is, l'chatchila, you shouldn't rely on these things. L'chatchila, a person should try to make the bracha, certainly, it would seem, as soon as he can, to avoid getting into these questions. The Gemara talks about if someone does not hear a bracha, the Gemara says, "B'chilo shama hechi nafik." If you haven't heard the bracha, how can you answer? How can you be yotze? So the halacha is, that's taka the halacha. The halacha is if you're being yotze a bracha from somebody else, you have to hear it. You have to hear the entire thing. M'tchilasa vatzofer, the Shulchan Aruch says, and Mishnah Berurah says you have to hear the word baruch. This is a big problem. Sometimes you come in the middle of Kiddush, middle of Havdalah, you heard part of the bracha, you didn't hear the first few words. If you don't hear the beginning, you can't be yotze. The Mishnah Berurah says, Shulchan Aruch says. The Gemara says, yeah. So we're talking. So how can you be yotze if you didn't hear? The Gemara says we're talking about the person who didn't. Well, he doesn't need to be yotze. He didn't need. He just wants to answer amen, and he can say amen for any bracha, even if you didn't hear the whole bracha. That's how we paskin. A person can always answer amen, assuming it's a Jew who made the bracha, and we don't have any reason to believe that it's for avodah zarah, as we might have to do if it was a non-Jew making the bracha. But if it was, assuming it was a Jew and it was l'shem Hashem, you can make the bracha even if you didn't hear the entire bracha. Poskim disagree. How much do you have to hear? Some say you have to hear the Shem Hashem and the end of the bracha. Other poskim say even just the end of the bracha is enough. The Chayadim says even just the end of the bracha. If you know what the bracha is, then you have to say amen. The Gemara says you say amen for anyone except for kids. For kids who are practicing brachas, they're learning brachas. That's not a real bracha. That's just practice. You don't say amen. But the Gemara says, "Hanimili b'dlo eden miftarayu, b'eden miftarayu onin." If they're saying a bracha b'eden miftarayu, you do say amen. Different shittas in the Rishonim, what that means. Either they're saying the Haftarah or they're making a bracha on food. In other words, if they're saying a bracha for real, not for practice, then you make a bracha even on a child's bracha. Mishnah Berurah brings from the Pri Megadim that because it's a mitzvah of chinuch, the mitzvah of chinuch is to teach him brachas, and Mishnah Berurah says that mashmos is, that's the language of the Shulchan Aruch, that the kivan b'nei chinuchim, since they're b'nei chinuch, you make, and they're making a real bracha, not just practice, you answer amen. Mishnah Berurah brings from the Pri Megadim that if it's before higia l'chinuch, the child is 1 or 2 or something, even if he's making a bracha on food, you train him to make a bracha on food, you don't say amen. Many people do say amen. Some claim the minhag is that we say amen even on tiny children as long as they're making a bracha, and that is a widespread custom, not like the Mishnah Berurah is to say brachas on children's brachas, even if I've heard that some poskim would pretend to say amen, they would say amen without saying the full nun at the end, but Mishnah Berurah says you don't say amen, others say that you do say amen. Daf Daled, beginning Perek Haroah, the 9th Perek, the Mishnah talks about making a bracha on a place that was Nasi bo Nisim liYisrael, miracles were performed for Israel, gives various examples of that, Kriyas Yam Suf and so on, and the crossing the Yarden. It has to be Nisim liYisrael. It has to be Nisim for the whole Klal Yisrael. If it only happened for K'tas Yisrael, for a portion of Klal Yisrael, it was not either for all or for Rov, even if it happened to entire Shvatim, if it wasn't for Rov Yisrael, then you don't make the bracha. even when you do make this bracha, this is a halacha we find with regard to other brachas as well, you only make the bracha if you see it periodically, you haven't seen it for 30 days. Within 30 days, you don't make the bracha again. After 30 days, you do make the bracha. If a person had a personal nace, then other people in general, if it wasn't Kol Yisrael, they don't make the bracha. But you yourself, you make the bracha when you pass that place. You say Baruch, you say the bracha Sha'asli Neis and Makom Hazeh. Your descendants also make the bracha of Sha'asli Neis La'avi b'Makom Hazeh. The Shulchan Aruch says. Shulchan Aruch says Yesh Omrim. Some say that these brachas on Nisim are only made if the nace is supernatural, if it's Yotzei Minhag Shalom. But a nace which is natural, Ganavim came, and you were in danger, and you were saved from the Ganavim. That happens sometimes. That's not an extraordinary, supernatural nace. You don't make a bracha. Yesh Cholik, some say you do. That's also a nace. You were saved from potential misfortune. You do make a nace. You do make the bracha. The Shulchan Aruch says the recommendation is make the bracha without Shem Malchus. Mishnah Berurah brings from Achronim that besides the bracha, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, she brought a carbon toda, someone who was saved from a dangerous situation. Bisman hazeh, a person should give tzedakah, distribute it to those who study Torah. He should say Yehi Ratzon, he should ask Hashem, which be considered as though I brought a Toda. He should say the Parsha of Toda. He should contribute to public works, Tzarchei Rabbim, and every year he should have a commemoration where he thinks about the great favor Hashem did for him in saving him from these misfortunes. Chayadim talks about a case that he had. There was a terrible fire, a gunpowder explosion, and Baruch Hashem, people were saved from death, even though he suffered financial harm, and he relates an entire Suda he made, and tzedakah that he gave, and prayers that he recited. That's this idea. The Gemara then goes to discuss the concept of the Birchas HaGomel, the bracha that you make for, besides Sha'asli Nisim, there's another bracha, Birchas HaGomel, that we make commonly Bisman Hazeh, 4 categories: Yardei Hayam, seafarers, Holchim and Baros, those traveling through deserts, someone who was sick and was cured, someone who was locked in Beis Asurim and became free. He makes Hagomel Chasidim Tovim. We say Hagomel Chayivim Tovos. Shegmalani Kol Tov. You need 10 people. The Gemara says. Post can disagree about whether it's 10, including the person who's making the bracha, the person who had the nace or not. You also have to have 2 of them have to be Chachamim, 2 of them have to be Rabbanim. We Shulchan Aruch Paskins, you need 10 and 2 Chachamim. If there are no Rabbanim, though, you should still make the bracha anyway. If you don't have 10 at all, that's a question. Some say you're Yotzei B'diavad, some say you're not even Yotzei at all. Shulchan Aruch says you should make the bracha again without Shem U'Malchus. The minhag is to make it when you have a Sefer Torah, but that's only a minhag. It's not such a major requirement. The halachos is supposed to make the bracha within 3 days of being saved, l'chatchila. So the Mishnah Berurah post can bring that even if that's going to be before Kriyas HaTorah, the nace happened right after Kriyas HaTorah on Monday, it's going to 3 days is going to be Tuesday and Wednesday, the person should make the bracha without the Sefer Torah, with Asar, but without the Sefer Torah. There's a major machlokas whether the Brachos Gomel is limited to these 4 cases enumerated by the Gemara or not. Shulchan Aruch says the first shita is lav davka, any nace, a wall fell or a rampaging ox nearly killed him and he was saved. Other examples that you make the bracha on any of these things, Brachos Gomel, yesh omrim she'ein mevarach Brachos Gomel, only on these 4. Shulchan Aruch's hachra is tov levarach below askar Shem U'Malchus. If a person had any salvation other than these 4 things, make the bracha without Shem U'Malchus. Mishnah Berurah says b'shem la'achronim, the minhag is kisvar rishona, that we do say it, v'chein mistaver, and Ashkenazim generally do make Brachos Gomel for other types of situations. Which ones are debated, but generally they do. Sfardim, however, my understanding is that Sfardim follow the Shulchan Aruch's recommendation not to make the bracha, certainly not b'shem U'Malchus, for anything except the 4 cases listed in the Gemara, listed in the Shulchan Aruch. One common machlokes is whether you make a bracha on airplanes. Some say it depends whether you cross a yam, then you're like seafarers. Some say it doesn't matter. Any airplane trip you make the bracha on. There are various different opinions with regard to airplanes. Daf Brachos, the Gemara talks about dreams. Most of it is agadita, different ideas about dreams. There are a few halachos. The Gemara brings at least 2 halachos about dreams. One of them is hatavas chalom. It says if a person has a dream and he's worried about it, nafshu aguma love, he should go to 3 people, 3 friends of his, the Shulchan Aruch says, and he says a formula, a response, with call and response. He says chama tava chazai. They say tavahu v'tava lehavi. There's a long formula in the Gemara. Hatavas chalom. Some people do this today, in yeshiva in particular. People occasionally come to you and do hatavas chalom. Others bring the Chazon Ish says that he wasn't makbid on dreams, that he didn't take dreams all that seriously, so he didn't worry so much about them. He didn't do hatavas chalom apparently. The post can bring various reasons why you don't have to be, in different cases, why you don't need to worry so much about dreams. The Gemara says, Kol chalom v'lo tavas. Any chalom, tavas means fasting. So what does that mean? So Rashi says it means a person should hope to see any dream except one of the really bad dreams that would require tanas chalom, would require fasting. But other Rishonim say, the Shartzin and the Mishnah Berurah brings from other Rishonim, that it means a person should worry about his dreams. Kol chalom he should worry about, except for dreams that come after fast days, because he was fasting, he was distressed, he was uncomfortable, so that's why he had a bad dream. Mishnah Berurah said, we see from that if a person had any kind of tsar gadol, any kind of great distress, and then he had a bad dream, we shouldn't worry about it. He should write it off to the bad thing that happened to him during the day. The Ralbag says even Yaakov Avinu, one of the reasons he dreamed about fighting in Parshas Vayishlach is because he was thinking all day about fighting with Esav. The Aruch HaShulchan also says, Aruch HaShulchan is talking about Tanis Chalom, not about Hatavas Chalom, but Aruch HaShulchan says, better not to be too worried about dreams, he says, particularly dreams that a person thought about during the day. That's why he dreamt about it. It's not Min HaShamayim, it's not a bad sign. Certainly, Pshita less than mamash in such a case, or if he ate a lot, he says, he filled his belly with food, then the vapors, the effects of the food caused fantasies in his head and less than mashasha. So, in general, many posts can give various reasons why you don't need to be so strict about every dream. So, one halacha, Baron Shulchan Aruch, is a tavas chalom. The other halacha is a well-known one, which is universally practiced, is almost universally practiced, is someone who has a dream, doesn't know what it means. L'yada ma'chaza, the Gemara says, he should stand before the Kohanim when they're parsi yadayim, when they duchen, when they do brachas kohanim, and he should say, Ribbonu shel olam, ani shalach, v'chal masai shalach, alam chalamti b'nei de'amahu. The formula that we know, that we say on, we Ashkenazim, we typically say it on the Gimel Regalim, on Yom Tovim, where the Kohanim do brachas kohanim. Mishnah Berurah says that since we only do it on those times, we only duchen on those times, you don't have to say it only if you actually had a dream, because probably he says, sure, everyone's had a dream since the last Yom Tov. They talk about what about the second day of Yom Tov, but certainly if you haven't, if it's been a few months since the last Yom Tov, certainly it makes sense to say it, even if you don't know that you've had a dream, because it's almost certain that you did. It's certain that you did. The Ramah goes on, in a place like our countries where we don't duchen, we only duchen on Yom Tov, but a person did have a dream and wants to say the Ribono Shel Olam, it's not really connected to Yom Tov. The Gemara doesn't say anything about Yom Tov. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say anything about Yom Tov. So you can say it every day. So even though we don't duchen every day, so you can say it when the Shliach Tzibur is saying Sim Shalom. And you can end it when they say Amen for the bracha of Sim Shalom. So you can really say it every day if you had a dream. Akranim say, the Mishnah Berurah says that saying it every day you shouldn't do unless you actually had a dream, because otherwise it's a sheker, it's not true. So on the Yom Tovim you can say it because it's almost certain that you had a dream since the last Yom Tov. You can really say it every day, the Ramah says, even when there's no duchening, even though there's no Kohanim there, you can still say the Ribono Shel Olam. But that, Mishnah Berurah says, you should only say if you actually had a dream and you want to pray to Hashem that the dream should not be harmful, should be harmless.